For somebody in my profession, even though my title is one of the more generic titles, it's Director of Learning and Development. I'm a salesperson by trade. Certainly that's evident in my background and some of the things we've discussed, but I'm also enablement focused, meaning that I'm looking to help our people in our organization.
This is the Storytelling for Sales podcast, a show about leveraging the power of storytelling to ignite your sales performance and grow your business.
Hello, this is Ed Bilat. Joining me today is Bill Ball, the Director of Learning and Development at Digital Intelligence Systems. Bill is also a founding member of Sales Enablement Society, and he is very passionate about sales talent management, sales enablement, and sales effectiveness. Bill plays a strategic role not only in a role-based development, but how people, systems, and departments can positively impact the success of producers and ultimately their companies. Bill Ball, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Love to have you on the show. I will be joined today by Sahir Pandhare as my co-pilot and co-host as well here in cold Ottawa today. Bill, I'm thrilled to have you on the show. Thank you for joining us. We would love to hear your story. But before we do this, I will ask you our traditional question. What type of business success story inspires you and why?
So I thought about this, and there's quite a few entrepreneurial stories that excite me, but I thought one that maybe I was a part of where I wasn't the ultimate success, but I was really proud to be a part of it, is something that I thought I would share.
Sure.
Great. So most businesses from a sales standpoint strive, most modern businesses, and I'm throwing this out as not just a shared truth among sales organizations, but I think it's probably a universal truth at this point that many sales organizations are striving to have a coaching culture of some kind. So late 2000s, I was working for an organization where we had one. We were really proud of it. You know, the job market at that time, I think, helped us a little bit, where we had people with greater tenure who were willing to give their time back. You know, they were bought in and they knew if they were sitting next to great other people doing their job, they'd be able to cross-pollinate and learn things from each other. So we created a circle of veteran peers who were coaching their peers, and everybody was getting a coaching from the leadership as well. But it's just, you know, as well as I do, people tend to make changes when they see their peers making those changes. They'll take guidance from the leaders, but they really make changes when they see peers making changes.
Absolutely. If they see something useful, they say, okay, I need to try this for myself as well.
Exactly. So that got a little bit more challenging when the job market improved because, you know, we were fine, but at the same time, we had people sort of circulating in and out because we were hiring a lot of recent college grads. And so we had people circulating in and out, no fault of theirs. They were learning, you know, what they wanted to do. Our coaching culture was still solid, but, you know, eventually, even with a coaching culture, you can't rely on entirely new people to carry a torch of that peer coaching because they don't have the experience. And at some point, it becomes a little bit of the blind leading the blind.
Yeah, absolutely. So like you don't know who's the real leader.
Yeah, it's the last thing that you want to have happen is, yes, great coaching culture, but you have what's called rogue coaching where it's like, well, hey, I don't know how everybody else is doing this, but this is how I do it. You start multiplying that.
Yeah, I see that.
You start multiplying that across the workforce. You know, it wasn't total pandemonium or anything like that, but it was just not like it was. At the same time, we started looking at technology to help with this kind of thing. We were an early adopter of thinking about, and this is an inside sales organization, so we're thinking about call recording as game film, which was very progressive at that time. We're talking mid to late 2000s. So a little bit of a different story now, but very progressive then, where, you know, you bring up call recording, I think in some organizations now anyway, they're still thinking, okay, this is Big Brother. You know, why do you want to listen to my stuff versus thinking like, okay, most athletes watch game film to get better.
Mm-hmm.
But being a younger company and being new to all of this and being sort of, you know, pioneers or trailblazers, you know, we didn't roll it out very well. So some people, you know, appreciated it. Some people didn't. The technology wasn't where it is today. It was a little bit of a struggle. And so this forced us to learn a lot about change management. But we eventually did get to a place of where we were reviewing, at least as leaders, one-on-ones with people and listening to their calls and talking to them about their game film. And that was great. But we still weren't back to that peer coaching level. You know, like if a peer is going to review game film with another peer and they're both, you know, 3 to 6 months in, like there's only so much advantage that can be gained from that. So we had a lot of friends. My previous business owners that I worked for a long time were pretty well connected within the inside sales world. And there was one gentleman, his name's Gary Milwit. He works for a financial firm in Maryland. He's the sort of prototypical ex-football coach, really tough guy that, you either love or hate, but his people loved him. I believe he was an AAISP award winner for sales leader one year too.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Sports and sales all in one. Okay.
Yeah, shocker, right?
Yeah.
Sounds like a really good combination. I mean, I would see someone in the sports field, especially coaching athletes, would have a really good understanding of how to communicate with someone and actually help coach in various aspects of sales, like how to close a deal or how to pitch properly.
For certain. And so he, like us, had started embracing call recording, maybe a little after we did, but either way, he was starting to use it with his team as a group. And so we went and visited him and watched that in action. And it's not as simple as you think. There's rules. Everybody has to know it's a safe place. Like there's certain kind of comments that aren't allowed. There's certain kind of comments that are allowed. There was, in some way, like I think he had sort of stumbled into something that was tremendous. We brought it back to our organization, and that was the whole reason we sat in. We were like, hey, we want to see what's happening here. We want to see if this is something that's viable to bring back. And it ended up being something that was really viable to bring back. So we started testing it with the CEO leading and testing out those rules. And it started out as a one-way conversation, but what it ultimately branched out to was I led them. And our managers led them and our peers led them. And we started breaking down those moments of the conversation where something really valuable happened. And when you can do that as a group, it's so much more powerful than when, you're sitting next to your neighbor as a sales peer and you're saying what happened. And, everybody remembers that last objection, but maybe 3 minutes before that, the call, went off track somewhere. So being able to do that as a group and start establishing business-specific best practices around that was a huge, huge win for us. The ultimate thing that happened, though, was it became a peer coaching thing again because we identified the key elements of conversations. We identified how to get better at them as a group. And the top of the mountain ended up being every month, we actually hosted a call competition where people would submit calls to their managers. The managers would submit them to myself and the business owners. We would judge. And in some cases, down the road, let the peers judge and play them all back, in a group meeting once a month. So using that and then actually taking those call recording elements and putting them in a library where people could say, okay, I want to hear what good objection handling sounds like, or I want to hear what a good introduction sounds like. By doing that, we were able to bring back a peer coaching culture because we're able to, get new people onboarded fast, understanding what good looks like.
I love that example. I think that's a great story. And I see you combining two elements here. So one is starting your own story library, right? So that's what we're trying to teach our clients, that instead of having those separate stories, why don't you create a company-wide library that at any given moment, any member of your team can go and borrow a book, a particular volume on the situation they're working with, right?
Right.
And another one is starting your own objection collection library, right? So this is what exactly you've done with the help of that coach. I think that's a terrific story. So thank you so much for sharing. I think it's actually a good segue to my next question. We just talked about the combination of sports and sales. And then I do look at your own background. I see you've been majoring in English and creative writing before, Bill. How did you even get into sales world yourself?
Good grief. So I grew up with a father as a traveling sales rep who worked for himself. Nowadays, it's not so exciting when the phone rings in your house, where everybody's running to say, I got it, right? Back before caller ID, that was a really big thing. But literally 80% of the time the phone rang in my house, everybody would run to get it, and it was from my dad. It's kind of defeating. So, between that and, me being a free spirit, I think I thought more about how much I wanted to play in a band my last year in college than, what I was going to do next steps. And hopefully my parents aren't listening. But when I finished school, he was like, hey, you want to come work for me? I tried to say in the nicest way, like, are you crazy?
Yeah. Why would I do that?
Yeah. But you know what? You can't deny personas and DNA to some point. So I was always that friend who would recommend music to other friends or restaurants to other friends. Like I was that connector friend. I had a vision of what I wanted and what I liked. And I would say probably my wife would say I'm pretty outspoken about those things and sometimes to my own detriment. But eventually I just needed to find something that I was passionate in. So I played in bands and I ended up working in a recording studio, which I thought was, what I wanted to do. Meanwhile, this was probably late 90s. So meanwhile, there's a lot happening with technology at that point. There was the megahertz race, and this was before gigahertz with Apple and IBM. There were all kinds of interesting things. My friends and I were getting excited about that. One day I went into the studio and I was working there as initially an intern and then a second engineer because I wanted to learn how to document music. Mm-hmm. That was a big passion of mine. And the band was late. And it was myself and the head engineer. He was like, Bill, I'm XYZ years old. We were talking about technology and lots of things, different things happening and kind of the future,
Yeah, absolutely.
Flash was exciting. iPods were exciting. This was probably even right before those. So lots to talk about. And he said, you know what? I love this job, but I'm in a dark room for a really long time and I don't make very much money. It's a labor of love. But honestly, if I'd picked a different trade, I think I'd have more options now. And this guy was one of my heroes. So it really made me think, and I grew up, even as misogynistic as it is watching James Bond and being like, I want to have awesome sports cars and I want to travel and meet amazing people. And so that really made me think like, okay, you know what? Maybe this is not my way forward. So I made a hard pivot. I did a few temp jobs. I eventually started working for a retail store that sold Apple products. And this was before Apple even had stores. So this was kind of like a small business consultant place. And I was rough at first, but by the end of my first, let's say month and a half, I was leading the rest of the company in sales. And it was because I had found something that I was passionate about.
What was the major challenge earlier on? Obviously, you haven't been trained in sales, right? So you just happen to see that this is your passion. This is where you can sort of have that alignment with your life goals. But what was your major challenge earlier on?
Well, earlier on, I didn't have a lot of challenges. It was easy for me to say, okay, this is what I have in inventory. These are the people coming in. If I ask them for what they want and I don't have it, I'm going to lose. Right. It's that straightforward. I need to just talk to them and break sort of the typical mold of the salesperson. We had competitions with this, how quickly can you get this middle-aged woman, on a first name basis that comes into the retail store, just those kinds of things, because it wasn't a big mental challenge once you had the product knowledge. But after that, thinking that, okay, I'm doing great here. I'm off for my next sales job. And that ended up being a traveling rep job where I had to do a lot of self-motivation. I wasn't prepared at all. I had no idea. I was used to people coming into me. So That was hurdle number one. But I think the big thing that really clicked for me, because I went from retail sales to outside sales and then back into inside sales, where I was like, okay, you know what? I haven't done this. I really like technology. I need to take a step back to take a larger step forward. And what I really learned first was, because I wanted to advance quickly in that business, was how to make a business case. And I didn't know, because of my degree that you mentioned, I was an English major. I'm clearly talky. I'm very verbal. So learning how to be brief and specific.
Which is not a bad thing at all, right?
Sure, but you have to learn how to annotate yourself, right? So learning how to be brief and specific and point to deliverables and measurables. The CEO and I did not get along well at first on that level, but once I learned how to communicate and speak that language, I ended up being an email coach for a lot of other sales reps.
Mm-hmm. This is where real writing helps, right?
Yeah.
And I saw good copywriters are extremely, extremely valuable now. And that every little sentence, every little inclination, a tone, humor, everything comes into place like a real art to create something what people will pay attention out of all the noise we live in today, right?
Right. What's breaking the mold of all of the other vendor noise, right? Absolutely.
Would you say you were a lot more verbose than you needed to be?
Yes, I was a lot more verbose than I needed to be. I thought I needed to tell the story of my work. Say I wanted a promotion or I wanted to see a change happen. Getting changes to happen in business, you have to completely translate what you're trying to achieve to the audience of the person you're reaching out to. So if you're talking to a CFO, being an L&D person right now, if I go in with a bunch of jingoistic L&D talk, I'm going to be talking to a wall. You have to translate what you're saying to the audience that you have. So I didn't understand how to speak to a CEO. I didn't understand, hey, these are the things that I've accomplished. This is why I want this promotion. This is what I expect to accomplish, and be able to point to actual results and speak and write in bullets, in easily digestible things versus a diatribe. I really had to learn that, Sahir.
Yeah, absolutely. That white space and formatting is so many times, when we're talking to sales leaders and they say, okay, one of my sales reps just sent me that email and I'm reading it and I understand it's a good idea. I just don't have 15 minutes to actually read it and really, really comprehend it. And then you get another email where everything is bullet points, concise, and there is a hook engagement call to action. Even in the internal communication, and they say, okay, I want to talk to him. I'm going to call him right now and we'll figure this out, right? And as simple as it sounds, that's the entire decision making. And it happens internally. And of course, it happens when we're facing customers. So I think it's a tremendous skill you have. So that's great. So thank you for sharing this.
First of all, it's making the message about the person, right? So it's the first thing that they need to see, that why is this relevant for me? You have to put yourself in their shoes anytime you're creating something for somebody else, even in a first sales email.
So individually tailoring your message for your specific audience?
Yes, and making it about them, not making it about you. So speaking in a language that they can understand, but also if it's an initial message, if you're talking about a prospect, it's got to be about them. The first thing, think about this. Think about what you do and what you think about when you're scanning your LinkedIn messages, or you're listening to your voicemails, or you're looking at your email box. You're looking at your subject line. You're looking at the length of that email. You're looking at who it's from. All of those things, you're looking for a reason to sort or flag. Do I need to pay attention to this, or can I dump it? Because you already have too much of it, right? So we have to be relevant as communicators, internally or externally, really quickly.
Absolutely. I love that idea. Whom do you follow in sales? Where did you learn your craft? Who was helping you?
Oh, man. So there's been lots of people along the way. Naturally, I spent a lot of time at this business called Vorsight, which is now associated with a business called ExecVision. And I have to thank all of the people that I worked with there, including the co-founders, Steve Richard and David Stillman. David Stillman is the person who I really, struggled with to learn how to speak to and establish business case. And once I did it, we're still good friends. But I think, this is a chance where there are people that I follow, but what I would advocate is constantly expanding your network and going to events and getting out of your day-to-day, because that's where, you're actually taking a pause to work on your own self-development. So people are helpful. There's lots of really smart people out there, but just being able to take a little bit of time, whether you're reading something or whether you're actually going to an event, because at that one point, you're finally just focused on your own self-development. It's very difficult in your job to do that. You may be thinking that you're getting developed in your job, and you certainly are, from people like me, from sales managers, from your peers. But if you don't do that extra layer, it really doesn't help you establish perspective that you can bring back inward with the things that you learned. That would be my thought on who do I follow. I meet people all the time. The other thing that I've learned along those lines, and we may talk about this a little more later, is if you think that you have to have all the answers, you're in for a struggle. So knowing that I'm part of a group outside of my work in my profession called the Sales Enablement Society, and there's lots of advantages. We're trying to define that, take the profession forward, a number of major objectives. But the thing that's been best for me is saying, I want to try this. Who in my network, somebody in my network has tried this before and failed before me many times. So just realizing you don't have to have all the answers, and reaching out to somebody in that network that you've built to try to get that answer just inherently expands your perspective.
Oh, that's excellent. I hear 2 points. The first one is basically that education is what other people trying to do to you, and learning is what you're doing for yourself. right? So go into those events, finding something really valuable for yourself, those golden nuggets you can use, right? And the second one is not to underestimate the power of your network, because we already have that connection. You already have your own think tank where you can go, and all you got to do is just to ask, has anyone done that before? Is that correct?
That was way more succinctly than I put it, and it was definitely correct.
Okay, great. We're always looking for golden nuggets for our listeners, and you certainly shared just several already, right? And we're just in the middle of the interview. So let's move to the second area, which was really interesting on your profile, which is learning and development. And I've read one of your statements, and obviously you work for a technology company, Digital Intelligence Systems. You guys do global staffing and IT consulting. How did you end up with technology?
For somebody in my profession, even though my title is one of the more generic titles, it's Director of Learning and Development. I'm a salesperson by trade. Certainly that's evident in my background and some of the things we've discussed, but I'm also enablement focused, meaning that I'm looking to help our people in our organization, particularly our salespeople and our delivery people. So I'm technically field enabled, not sales enablement. I've got to care about the recruiters too. So they're part of my key audience. It's helping them with what they need to know and what they need to show and removing those hurdles out of the way, whether it's things that they need to get better at or, how other people in the organization are affecting them. So for me, I chose technology, not necessarily because of the industry, but partly because of the work, because of the type of job. The type of job that I wanted to do and the type of challenge that I wanted to have was here. But for me, it's also not just industry, it's people. When I came through the interview process, IT staffing is a consolidated industry. It's a tricky play right now for some of the organizations. A lot of people are being acquired, or you're acquiring organizations. We acquired another organization earlier this year. So I heard two things from the CEO that were very heartening to me. One, that because of differentiation, he saw learning and development as a key strategy going forward to motivate and develop our people here. And he saw that as a differentiating factor too. Second, he shared that same bit with me that I just shared. In IT staffing, people are being acquired or they're acquiring others. Mm-hmm. Dices is in the business of acquiring others. They want to grow. So those are the two things that got me on board. The institutional knowledge, it was hard though. One thing I'd like to point out, I was at a previous organization for 9 years and in a series of different roles. So being a part of the institutional knowledge to coming to an organization where I had no institutional knowledge, it was definitely intimidating and an interesting choice. So I had to feel right with the direction the business was headed and for the type of work that I was going to do.
Absolutely. Because you're also a leader in your organization, right? As a manager, as a director, as a mentor, as a trainer, counselor, and coach. So you're doing all these things. So I own learning and operational technology, but I spend majority of my time on development and talent. So I thought that was really interesting. Not many people could formulate it like that.
Well, that was a little bit of knowing my audience on LinkedIn, right? So I teach salespeople how to be more effective, but certainly salespeople are going to be looking at my profile and asking questions. So I kind of wanted to set them up and say, what I really care about is spotting gaps and then going to the technology versus like, if you hit me up with, a one-trick pony email over LinkedIn, I'm probably not going to respond to you. It's all about the business strategy and working with the business to identify the gaps and then mapping the technology back versus saying, hey, there's some sexy new technology. I need to run after it. I want to get this.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of getting the attention as a leader, as a coach, how do you think storytelling could help to motivate your sales team and actually drive the success in terms of reaching or even surpassing quotas or objectives?
I think it's in 3 ways. And if I get lost while I'm explaining this, hopefully you'll hold me accountable.
Okay, right on.
First off, it ties back to the story I told at the beginning of our conversation where peers make changes because of peers. I'm going to make changes because of what I learned from another enablement person. Salespeople are going to make changes from other salespeople that they admire or respect in the organization. So when I do an in-person training, for example, or if even online, being able to have people have win stories associated with the learning objectives, even if it's just about a skill like objection handling, or it may be something as small as setting agendas for meetings. Just seeing peers key in on that and see that behavior change is huge, but you have to tee that up with peers sharing that to peers. I'm a little modest about talking about behavior change because I don't know if we necessarily need to change somebody's behavior. It almost sounds like we're brainwashing them a little bit, but just changes in their game. They're going to learn that by hearing other peer stories. This is where I was, this is what I discovered about myself. Hey, I'm just like you. So facilitating a way for peers to share stories is how you get them to try new things. So that's the first way. Mm-hmm. You asked me about a few different ways. I would say the second way is with customers, right? And this is something that, we have to challenge marketing with. What story moves one customer from learning about you to being a little bit more curious to wanting to have a serious conversation? Those are stories that drive each of those steps in their buying process. And it's the same for the salesperson. What stories can you tell that are going to drive a customer? Everybody wants to see themselves in somebody else's shoes. It goes back to talking about messaging, how we were talking about messaging before. You want to quickly say, you're looking at your email inbox. How is this relevant to me? The most powerful way that we can make something relevant to somebody is through a story. If they can see themselves in that story, they're captivated. It's in a conversation. It's in a training environment. It's in content. It's imperative.
Yeah, sure. Wonderful things happens when we tell a story, and not to bother you with the science, but there's two things. One is something called neurocoupling, and another one is called mirroring. So neurocoupling means that they actually made a research that a good story is told, that both brains start operate on the same frequency. And the person you're telling the story to, they see themselves in that story, right? So like it's happening to them. So that's one. And another one, they actually feel you. There's empathy created, right? Because they understand your feelings and they mirror your emotions. And you can't create it with almost anything else, marketing-wise. So that's why it's so powerful. I'm so glad you're already utilizing it in your organization. That's terrific. Sahir, I think you had a question.
Yes. Bill, I was wondering, what is the best way to motivate salespeople? There are obviously many ways, like there are bonuses, exotic trips, there's like a VIP club. But what do you think is the best way to motivate salespeople?
I don't think there's a way. I think it's a combination of elements that end up driving performance and driving people. There's you being the best judge of talent. If you're bringing the wrong kinds of people, and it may just be roles. Someone's not inherently good or bad, and I know that's a duh. But, if you're looking for an account manager and you've got a hunter, I've actually seen that backwards. I know a lot of people say, I want hunters and not account managers. Sometimes that's a backwards thing. If you have somebody who just wants to break accounts and they don't want to do the work afterwards to go broad and deep, you don't have the right person for the role. So talent would be one thing. The next would be environment. Are people motivated by what's happening around them? Do you have an office where nobody shows up because everybody's working from home? You've got to figure that out. How are people staying connected and staying motivated? Environment's huge. I'm a big advocate for loud and for people being able to hear each other and for that spurring everybody's development. I'm, open, public, transparent with information, data, stories, that kind of thing, because why not communicate it? Why not share it? So environment's a big key. I think we could debate ad nauseum the whole open office thing, but that's not where I'm going necessarily. It's just that, if people are doing the same role, they need to be able to see each other's work and be a part of each other's work to expand and grow their work and drive things. Obviously, the incentives. If the compensation and the incentives aren't in line, then you're already fighting a losing battle. That makes it tough to hire. That makes it tough to retain people. Even if you do a great pitch in the interview process and you don't have incentives, then you're not motivating people. You're going to lose. You're going to have just a treadmill of new hires over and over again until, Glassdoor eventually calls you out. Finally, there's a few other pieces, but understanding what good looks like and what success looks like in a job, from activities to objectives to results, and being able to show that employee what good looks like, from these are the things you need to do day in and day out. And this is the equation of things that you need to do to be successful. What does successful look like from a benchmark? Yes, results, right? A lot of people do it, but what's the map of activities that lead back to that result? There should be an equation there. And then finally, how are they using those activities and objectives and results to self-performance manage? You talk to managers, and I think the quintessential thing is the idea of their one-on-ones being a pipeline review. And those things are great. But, what I would say is, A, certainly use some of those pipeline reviews as coaching sessions instead on a particular skill that you've inspected. But B, if it's a pipeline review, have the employee do it. Have them own that data and have them drive that conversation. That lightens the lift on you, and it also lets you know that they're hearing you if you guys have a same vision of objectives and results. So I think it's a combination of all those things. And then when you start throwing out, I think you mentioned, President's Club, that kind of stuff. Yes, that's key to a culture, but that's also a tricky one. It's a moving target. You're not going to motivate the entire group of people with one kind of incentive. So you need to keep it going. For more senior people, maybe it's time off, or monetary incentives or trips or escapes just so they can unplug. For junior people, it's doing activities together, but it's also getting out early. That's the one that I've seen time and time again be the thing that presses the button. It may not be money. It may just be getting their time back. So all of those things.
Great.
When I think about trends, technologies that are rocking the sales industry today, you have the rise of artificial intelligence, automation, rise of Generation Y as they're becoming a rising powerhouse as both buyers and sellers. There's a trend towards account-based selling. I want to ask you, what sales trends do you think we should watch out in 2019 as a new year is coming by? What do you think we should watch out for in this industry?
I think all of the things that you mentioned, ABM and AI, are important. As a simple one that's possibly obvious and possibly not is just video. There's lots of applications that aren't expensive or are free for salespeople to shake up the typical email voicemail thing and use video. And some of them give you teleprompts. They get pretty involved, but we can't deny that videos now and becoming a big part of selling. You don't have to be a social seller to use video. It's huge. And AI certainly too, right? Scaling, that coaching and inspection is helpful. But what I would say is with AI, you always run the risk of creating too much rigor. We need to look at AI and how it flatters the architecture that we've built. There still needs to be some kind of jazz band in there. And without it, there isn't any creativity. I've seen both sides with new hires and experienced people. And if you really lock down too hard what good looks like, and a machine can certainly do that, you start limiting what people can become. So finding a strike a balance between the organic and the architecture, I think, is huge. And then how we use AI in it. But, the people that say AI are going to replace sales coaches or you can let the AI do the work, there has to be the organic human touch in there too.
This is so true, Bill. So one of our clients, they just try to use AI for scheduling sales appointments. And then naturally, salespeople just start using AI, to send those appointments and just book them, right?
Right.
And you probably could foresee what actually happened. That would be angry customers to tell me, okay, if my business is so important to you, why did you throw me to a robot who continues to ask me some stupid questions, right? And try to see where I'm available. Just call me and, let's talk, because that's the reason you wanted to talk to me, right? So to have that conversation. Why do I have to deal with your machine, which doesn't understand my responses? So what are you trying to sell me at this point, right?
That's misplaced, right? So maybe right now where we are, a hair appointment and not a sales appointment. Somebody wants a sales appointment with me. I'm thinking I'm the scale, right? One hand has to fill up with value and it has to outweigh the amount of time in the other hand that it's going to take on my calendar. And I think it's really difficult to convey that through AI. I know prospecting is possibly the hardest and most painful part of selling, but that's absolutely the reason that we shouldn't leave it up to AI.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's been a terrific interview, so really appreciate it. I'm going to ask you one last question. What does the art of storytelling means to you?
I think it's all of the things that we hit on, right? But when ultimately audience can see themselves in what you're conveying, that's where the empathy, that's where the change, that's where the way forward happens. It's such a key to our communication. And frankly, communication and lack of it is where we go wrong in our roles. We're way too committed to outputs versus communication. And if we can use more communication and stories to tell that, that's what captivates people. That's what gets people engaged. And that's what creates business and moves us forward.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So, Bill, what's the best way to connect with you or follow you on the social media for our listeners?
I think, hopefully you've been entertained if you looked at my Instagram, but what I would say is professionally, just good old LinkedIn is fine. I'm happy to connect and talk to anybody as long as it's not a sales development representative who asked for a meeting on the first go.
With using AI, right?
Yes. Yeah, that too. Yeah, that would be
Okay, perfect. So we'll make sure that we'll include your information to contact our listeners. So I'm thrilled to have you on the show. So thank you so much for the great ideas. I think there's a lot of golden nuggets here. So again, thank you for coming to the show. So happy to have you here.
This was absolutely a delight and my pleasure, and really appreciate the content, the direction, the conversation, and the questions. Hopefully somebody's at least amused by it.
Thank you so much, Bill.
Bye.
Thank you, Sahir.
That does it for this episode of Storytelling for Sales. You'll find show notes and links on our webpage, storytellingsales.com. You can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.